Hi, I'm Jerry Richards from Cool Cat Creations, and today we're going to do the video on the Stella Bag. So what you'll need to make this is the pattern, Stella Bag and wallet. You will need a zipper or zipper tape, which is what this is, the zipper tape, and I've used a pull. You will need your lining, a pencil, a chalk, this is the one I prefer. A small square is really useful. I actually really like this little one as well. Some clips, they're really helpful for doing the handles. A small pair of scissors, and a large pair would work as well. A rotary cutter for squaring, and of course some pins as well. So to start with, you're going to read your instructions, open to the first page, and cut your pieces to the size that it calls for. Then you're going to sew the first piece on with 1/4 inch, and then your third piece. So I'm going to do that right now. And I'm moving my needle over to 1/4 inch. Now you're going to press the seams toward the small strip. I like to press from the front, just making sure that the seam allowance is going toward that center seam. Press both sides. And then you can check and make sure the seams are down properly. And then you're going to take your fusible foam. This side is not fusible, and this is the fusible side. It's a little bit rough. Lay it on top and press it down. Okay, next we're going to do the quilting on top of the bag. Okay, so what I've done is I've changed the foot on my sewing machine to an open toe foot. The open toe foot is open so you can see where you're going. It's great for quilting. And I always quilt first down the seam on both sides. I'm using black because the background is black on both. I'll put my needle back into the center and quilt down both sides. Now I'm going to, now that I've quilted down both sides of that small band, I am going to do just a little bit of quilting on this. This one has polka dots in rows, so I'm actually going to follow the polka dots down and just do a zigzag on those polka dots. If you want, you can do the other side as well. And when I have something like this was very, very floral, what I like to do is I like to quilt around the flowers instead of going through them. I think it looks better. And it's easy when you have the open toe foot because you can see where you're going. But there is a lot of stopping and turning. And the other thing, if your machine has a button where you can have the needle stop in the down position, that is much easier. So you would just continue on and quilt around whichever flowers and leaves that you wanted to quilt on. Okay, now we're going to do the handles. So follow the directions for the sizes of the handles, the 2 pieces of fabric, along with the piece of Pellon. The Pellon that I've been using that I really like is Inspira. So one thing you can do is cut off the edge of, after you've sewn the seam, cut off the excess foam if you would like, but you have to be very, very careful with it. I use a pair of curved scissors when I cut it off, and I'm very careful. And then trim the edges down. These aren't the best scissors for that. And then with a pencil, a dull pencil with an eraser, pull up the fabric so that you have 1 layer of fabric after you've trimmed your corners. It's a little, not that difficult to find the 1 layer. If you just pinch it and kind of push it a little bit, you'll see that there is one layer. Push it down a little bit, then push it with your eraser. If your hands are really dry, like mine are, you can spray with a little water and then push the fabric in and out the hole. I've already done the other side, now I'm pulling it. Push the other through that very small opening. It's only about 1 inch long, that's all I need. And then take the dull end of your pencil and poke out the corners nicely. There we go, and re-pull. Then what you're going to do is take an iron, and you'll see that one side will actually look a little better than the other. This is a little rounded. Iron from this flatter side and press it really good down. Push the excess in from that little opening that I had. It's a very small opening. Push that down, iron all the way. Then you are going to take, I like to use chalk liner. It's very fine. And measure 1 inch up, draw a line, measure another inch from that and draw a line. The first line is where you're going to stitch that onto the bag. The second line that you've drawn, that's where you stop sewing. Then what I do is I take it and make sure that I've pushed the inside in and clip it all the way. And then I am going to sew it on my sewing machine, and I am going to use my seam ripper and show you how I do that. So this is a new bag I'm working on, and it is not squared yet. So you would have quilted it how you want to quilt it. I always quilt down that middle seam. That holds it in place well. And then do whatever quilting you want to do, and we're going to pretend that it is squared. So the top of the bag is actually going to look like that. So I am going to measure over some people get confused on this, so I'm going to show you. I'm measuring over 3.5 inches from the edge and 2 3/4 inches from the top down. And then I'm going to mark that corner. So that corner is where the handle is going to go, right in that corner. And then what I'll do is pin it down so that I can sew it. So that's where it goes. And then you would do the same for the other side. Make sure it's not twisted and sew it down. Okay, what we're going to do is mark the top of the bag. The bag has already been quilted and squared. We're going to go 3.5 inches from the side and 2 3/4 inches from the top. Then I'm going to, with a chalk liner, mark that corner. The handle will fit right into that corner, and I will pin it down. And I guess I didn't mention before I started sewing the edge, I did slip stitch that little tiny opening in the handle closed. You hand stitch that. If you hand stitch it first, it's much better than trying to catch it in your seam. It's just a very small, about 1 inch long. So just hand stitch that first. Then you can sew your handle on. And there is your line. And if you need to remark that line, you can, so that you can see it. So you would start here, stitch across, stitch down close to the edge, across this way, and I would take the pins out as I go, back up, then I go back over and diagonally across to this corner, then back over here, up diagonally and back down and fix it or back stitch it there. And then it's very secure, it will never come off. Now that we have the handles on the bag, front and the back, we're going to do the lining. So cut out the lining according to directions and cut out your interfacing, fusible interfacing. It can be a medium weight interfacing if you'd like. And we're going to do the pocket. The interfacing goes on the back of the pocket. Stitch up the sides on 1/4 inch, trim the corners, and then turn it right side out and press it. So we're going to do that. On the bottom of the bag and the bottom of the lining, you're going to draw 2-inch squares. So I have them drawn on the bottom of this, and I'm going to measure up 5 inches from the bottom and draw a line with the chalk. And that is where your pocket goes. So it's the open end of your pocket. Line it up in the center of the bag, and you can pin it on. The pins don't have to be at the edge. It's just to hold it on while you sew. Then again, you're sewing 1/4 inch from the edge of that pocket, the open end. Don't go through your pins. Make sure to move your pins. You don't don't have to take the pins completely out, just move them out of the way of your needle. I like to, when I am stitching a seam, to go back in, to not end at the end of the seam. It's going to work much better for you if you go back in a little bit and make that seam. The same as when I start an edge. I don't start at the very edge either, which I'm going to show you right now with this. I'm going to iron this down and I'll pin it. And again, they don't have to be at the very edge, so I'm going to put them here out of the way. When I start, here's the edge of the pocket. I'm actually going to start down here, and I'm going to back stitch up to the top and down, go all the way around and end down in here. That will secure your pocket is being used and pushed all the time. That will secure the pocket much better. You just want a small stitch along there. So I'm going to back stitch up to the edge. Sometimes it's hard to see where the edge is. And the only reason I go all the way around, it's just much easier than stopping and starting. I'm just going to push those threads in. What can happen when you get to the end of a pocket and you start to backstitch, it can push the fabric out of the way. So the easy thing is to just turn your piece of fabric around and then you can secure it and cut it. Now the only other thing I'm going to do is split the pocket in about a half. You can mark that if you'd like. I usually just eyeball it. I'm pretty good at that. So again, I'm starting at the bottom, but I'm starting up a little bit and I will back stitch to the bottom. Stitch up. And I'm going to just turn the pocket like that and do a little fix on it and a cut. And there's your pocket. Now what we're going to do is add the key fob. Some people were wondering where the key fob goes. It goes down a couple of inches and on an angle like that. So you can just go in and in the seam allowance, just kind of go up and down to secure that in place. And then you can cut your threads and cut that excess off. Next, we're going to do the zipper. And I like to use, it's called zipper tape. You buy it by the yard. It's a number 5. It's wider, much easier to use for a bag. So I'm going to just take it apart a little bit. And here's the key fob, which you buy separately. If you take and just kind of put that in on an angle, on one side just a little bit, and then the other side do the same, just on an angle. Try to get them about even. And it's as simple as that. It's very easy to put them on. You're going to cut the zipper to fit the bag. The bag should be 14.5 inches wide. And what we're using for the ends of the bag is a 4-inch wide piece of fabric. 4 inches by about 5 inches. Fold it in half and then fold in half again, which is actually the same method that you would use for the key fob. I like to draw a line 1/2 inch in from the finished edge, and I would then pin the zipper up to that edge, and I'm going to secure the zipper on here. I'm going to sew take the pins out and go across again. Now, one thing I do like to do sometimes is cut a little bit of the teeth away. It just makes it a little bit easier when you're putting the bag together. These are brand new scissors I just bought, and I'm not crazy about them. They're sticking to things. I'm just going to cut a little bit of the teeth off, like about 2. And then I'm going to fold it back down. And stitch just a little bit from the edge, and then I'll turn it around and stitch back. Then what I'll do is I'll take my ruler and cut that flush on both sides so that it looks like this. I would cut this zipper at 13 inches from the edge of there, and then put the other piece on the end the same way I did this one. Then what will happen is your zipper will then be 13.5 inches. I want the zipper to be 1/2 inch from either end. So at that, to put the zipper on, just pin it on both sides. You can mark your 1/2 inch, then stitch your zipper on. Because it's such a wide zipper, I don't even have to change my foot, but depending on what zipper you use, if you use a regular zipper, regular dress zipper, you will have to probably put your zipper foot on and stitch that on. So after I've stitched that on, then I can take my lining and pin the lining on and stitch the lining. So after that lining is stitched on, what I like to do is press it, and then with the seam allowance, the foam, press to the lining side. I like to top stitch along there. It kind of holds that lining down, and then press it again. Okay, so after you've quilted the bag and have all the quilting done that you want, you're going to square that bag down to 14.5 inches by 12.5 inches long. I usually like to lay one of the lines, the 5-inch line, along the edge of the middle seam. That seems to work really well. And then you will just cut off both edges, flip it around, and cut off the other 2 edges so that it's a nice and square. Okay, so now we're ready to put the second half of the zipper on. So what I've done, it's gonna look like this. Again, a 1/2 inch from each edge, I'm pinned the zipper on, and I'm going to sew that zipper down. I am using a number 5 zipper, so I'm just using my regular seam allowance. It's nice and wide, wider than a regular sewing zipper. Sometimes you have to move the zipper part, the pull. And I'm going to lift the foot up and pull the zipper pull over, if I can get it over. There we go. And finished the zipper. Okay, so that's the zipper. And now we're going to put the lining in, and the lining again, just line that up with the edge of your bag and stitch that on. And again, you may have to move your zipper at some point. Like right now, I'm going to pull zipper, pull over out of the way, and finish. Okay. Now, I like to press that. Here's what it looks like. But I'm going to press the seam allowance toward the lining and then top stitch that lining. That helps the bag just look better. So I'll press that, top stitch it. I will move my needle over to top stitch it because I don't want it all that far from the edge. But if you can't move your needle, just find another spot to use. Done. Now this is important. You have to open your zipper because now you're going to sew it together. And if you don't open it, you won't be able to open the bag. So there's what the lining looks like, and here's what the bag looks like. We're going to open the zipper about 3/4 so that we can flip it out. And I see that I haven't marked my squares, so I'm going to mark the squares. They're marked there. Using my pencil, and I'm using the little square. Okay, so what I've done is I put the pieces together, and I've used my clips and clipped all the way around on the foam. And then I've used the pins, the straight pins on the lining. You can use the others if you want to, but I find that the pins are good for the lining. So now I'm going to leave an opening, probably about 7 inches or so, in the bottom of the lining, and I'm going to stitch all the way around to the lining. And then I'm going to show you how to do the corners. So now I'm going to show you how to do the corners. You have the little squares drawn on both sides. All you have to do is grab the corners and stitch across that line. I'm going to put my needle back into the center. It was on 1/4 inch. Now back into the center, and I do want to back stitch a little bit. You can have your seams going in opposite directions. And you can just cut the excess off. When I do the foam, I like to go across the foam twice. And I'll show you that, because it's a little thicker. Make sure the seams are going opposite directions. And then I'm going to go down about 1/8 of an inch from that seam and just sew again. It's just a little extra, which I think is good because it's the bottom of your bag, and then you can cut that excess off. Turn the bag, so I've reached inside through the lining and I'm opening the zipper all the way, and then just pull it through. Then I'll poke out the edges, and I'll do the same thing on the bag. And here's a little trick that some people seem to have a hard time with. Push that up. You can use a pencil, or I'm just using my finger, but that's how you have those edges looking good, is to, from the inside, just push those right up. Then what you're going to do is iron down the edges of your seam, stitch along there, and push it through. And your bag is done. That's it.